the Battle of Irthlingborough, or how a small town in rural Northamptonshire took on Hollywood and lost.
1913. Although almost 100 years had passed since Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, the battle still raged in the British psyche. Within a matter of years, other battles, the Somme, Passchendaele, Ypres, would vie with Waterloo for attention, but none would eclipse its memory. And so it was that with commencement of the bloodiest war in history, scarcely more than a year away, the Battle of Waterloo was refought, this time on English soil and for the benefit of the camera. This is the story of how an American director by the name of Charles Weston turned a small town in Northamptonshire into Britain's answer to Hollywood, and in so doing shut down the local shoe industry for a whole week. As to why he chose this particular spot of rural England to stand in for Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington himself can be thanked or blamed for that.
A few years after leading his troops to a famous victory at Waterloo, Charles Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, was staying with his friends, the Arbuthnotts, at Woodford House near the village of Woodford in Northamptonshire. While out walking with the Right Honourable Charles Arbuthnott, MP, in nearby Findon, the Duke remarked upon how much the landscape thereabouts reminded him of the fields of Waterloo. Arbuthnott, a retired Army general, decided to commemorate Wellington's remark by commissioning a roundhouse in the Duke's honour. The building, which stands close to the spot upon which the Duke made his remark, bears a plaque with an inscription that reads, "Panorama, Waterloo Victory, the 18th of June, A.D. 1815. Somebody else who was aware of a resemblance between the Northamptonshire countryside and Waterloo was an American film producer by the name of Charles Weston. In 1913, Weston was staying in the Horseshoe Inn in the small town of Irthlingborough as the guest of the landlord Joseph John Inward, to whose daughter, the actress Alice Inward, Weston was married. Inward told Weston about the Duke's remark shortly before the British and Colonial Kinematograph Company commissioned Weston to produce and direct their latest film, The Battle of Waterloo. The British and Colonial Kinematograph Company was founded in 1908 by Albert Henry Bloomfield and John Benjamin Mack McDowell. In those days, filmmaking in Britain was something of a cottage industry with nobody to rival the likes of Hollywood's Goldwyn Picture Company and Fox Film Corporation. B&C, as it was generally known, initially operated out of a rented basement in central London before moving to studios at Newstead House, East Finchley. The company soon became known for its documentaries and feature films, most notably the Lieutenant Daring series, featuring Percy Morgan, and a series of films featuring the infamous highwayman Dick Turpin. By 1912, the company had moved into making longer films such as Robin Hood Outlawed. Bert Bloomfield and the British and Colonial Kinematograph Company went their separate ways in 1913, leaving John McDowell as sole proprietor. Mack then took a massive gamble and remortgaged the company to partly fund what would be B&C's biggest film to date, The Battle of Waterloo. To maximize the film's chances of success, he handed producer and director duties over to Charles Weston, who had already made several successful films for B&C. Charles Weston was born in Jacksonville, Florida, on the 24th of May, 1886. After an initial childhood stint as a circus performer, he became a stage actor, appearing all over the States, most notably on Broadway. His acting led to work in the nascent American film industry, where he trained as a director and producer. His career in film was a short one, lasting as it did from 1912 to 1917. However, in those brief years, he was involved in more than 65 films in both America and England, sometimes as an actor, but more often working behind the camera as director or producer. It was his marriage to the English actress Alice Inward that lured him across the Atlantic to Irthlingborough, a small town in England surrounded by shoe and boot factories. Filming of the Battle of Waterloo began on the 9th of June, 1913, much to the delight of the local population.
You never saw anything like it.
Jack Inward, Weston's brother-in-law, was to recall many years later.
So many people stayed away from work to earn 7 shillings and 6 a day as film extras that the local factories had to close down for a week. Everyone was recruited for the film. Unemployed men from Northampton were brought out. Every horse for miles around was hired, and even dead ones bought to make the battlefield look realistic.
As many carts as could be found were purchased from local farms to be transformed into gun carriages. About 100 men from C Squadron of the 12th Lancers based at Weedon Barracks were recruited as extras with the full blessing of their officers, who felt the filmmaking would be a welcome break from routine for the men. Under the command of Captain Murray and Sergeant Major Hart, they took up quarters at the Three Chimneys roller skating rink. According to the regiment's official history,
an accommodating American made the rounds of all the pubs at night to pay for drinks. The fact that Napoleon could not ride and that a sergeant in the regiment appropriated Wellington's boots nearly prevented the film being made and C Squadron from taking part in the most exciting, best-paid, and least painful battle in the regiment's long history.
In preparation for filming, 40 actors from London arrived at Irthlingborough Station to a rousing reception from cheering youngsters. On Monday, the 9th of June, rehearsals for the battle began in the meadows surrounding the Three Chimneys. Almost inevitably, given the scale and nature of the undertaking, accidents happened. The first occurred to Corporal H. Green of the 12th Lancers, who was thrown from his horse, resulting in his back and hip being bruised and one of his hands lacerated. First aid was administered to him by a Superintendent Avery of Findon and a Police Constable Lee of Irthlingborough. After the local doctor, Dr. Robb, had looked the man over, he was transported by ambulance to the Horseshoe Inn. The second victim was John Cook from Kettering, who got in the way of a cavalry charge and was knocked down. Private C.R. Hales from the St. John Ambulance Brigade ascertained that Mr. Cook had 2 fractured ribs. This casualty of war was taken to Dr. Robb's surgery for treatment.
On June 9, 1913, the London Evening News dispatched their film critic W.G. Faulkner to report on the goings-on in Irthlingborough. He had got as far as Wellingborough Station, some 6 miles away from Irthlingborough, when he was accosted by a postman who gleefully reported on the latest intelligence he had received from the battlefront. "They've had 3 casualties," said the postman with undisguised glee. "Any killed?" asked Faulkner. "No, they haven't killed anybody yet," came the reply. "But I shan't be surprised if they do before they're done." Upon his arrival in Irthlingborough, Faulkner learned that filming had begun at 7 in the morning with a fusillade of cannon fire followed by the seemingly non-stop firing of muskets.
"Trap and wagonette,"
wrote Faulkner.
"Bus and cart, motor bus and motor car were laden with people all going in the direction for which I was making. In the little towns the schools were closed. The children would not attend. The workmen had laid down their tools. The factory wheels had stopped. The housewives had put the key in the door, and had left the house to take care of itself. 2 factories in a neighboring town had shut up to allow 800 employees to witness the battle.
Weston's recreated Waterloo battlefield consisted of 3 fields leading down to a brook. Crowds 20 to 200 deep surrounded these fields and were kept in check by a handful of policemen augmented by extras dressed as soldiers.
Weston, by all accounts, acted very much like a bit of a Napoleon himself. Several officers from the 12th Lancers were heard to express their admiration for the masterful manner in which he barked out orders through his megaphone. One such order, as recorded by Faulkner, was, "Charge you there, shoutin' and come full gallop."
Whereupon,
Faulkner wrote,
100 or more cavalrymen dashed pell-mell in the direction of the poor infantry round the gun. It was a fine sight, and the marvel to me and all of us was that in the melee no one was hurt. The foot soldiers fired point-blank right at the heads of the cavalrymen, whose charge was, by the aid of the guns, repelled. Then they rode back, the whole of the 100.
With the melee over, it was finally time for Napoleon to get in on the act. His state carriage, which had once belonged to a city sheriff, came down the hill drawn by 4 horses. After placing his right hand in his jacket and giving a theatrical bow, Napoleon got in the carriage intent on placing himself in the thick of the fighting. The horses, however, were less keen and refused to budge. "Come here, you aides," came the order from Weston. "Ride alongside the carriage. We've got to get it up that hill to the troops if you're all killed at the job." The horses were eventually persuaded to stop being divas and raced past the camera at breakneck speed, forcing poor old Napoleon to cling to his seat for dear life. As the carriage reached the crest of the hill, a bugle boy bugled fiercely while the little corporal's soldiers loudly cheered his arrival. Nearby, a couple of haystacks caught fire, causing a stampede of horses and men. Napoleon was shortly joined by Wellington, who had come to watch one of his Highland regiments in action. "Steady, boys," Weston ordered. "Don't fire until you see the man in the white jacket drop his handkerchief. You cavalry at the rear keep on the crest of that hill watching the scene here."
Weston had just called an end to the day's proceedings when a cannon broke from its position, went careering down the hill, and dropped into a ravine onto the very spot where Wellington had been standing just minutes before. Unfazed, Weston ordered the wreckage to be filmed.
Then the troops rode off the ground.
Faulkner noted.
300 mounted men, 100 or more of regular troops, dressed in Waterloo uniforms, passed up the main street of the little town. The people lining the streets cheered. The yards of the public houses emptied, in the process of draining every barrel dry, to see the strange sight.
The Yorkshire Factory Times reported that Charles Weston's
management of the big crowd of actors and supers was masterly under difficulties, especially when the meeting between Blucher and Wellington was being filmed outside Bell Alliance, which meeting, by the way, was modeled on Maclise's picture of this subject.
The report went on to give an insight into Weston's management style.
Dead men were strewn on the ground and clustered in heaps. The operator was taking the picture when some of the dead moved. Mr. Weston grabbed a brick and, shaking it in the air, shouted huskily, "If any dead man moves, I'll use this." The great features of this film were the wonderful charges made by the 12th Lancers. Their wild charge through a small stream was a fine piece of work, in which, unfortunately, 4 of their men were injured, through a horse slipping in trying to regain the opposite bank. "Is it filmed?" asked the producer, eagerly referring to the accident, and then he rushed off to attend to the injured men. Another impressive picture was that in which the French cuirassiers, 12th Lancers, charged at the full gallop, cutting and slashing at the Gordon Highlanders, and so splendid was their horsemanship that only one man was knocked down. Detail was carefully attended to. Dead horses were arranged so as to gain the best effect, and before each engagement in which firing took place, smoke pots, which gave out a low-lying yellow smoke, were flung in various parts of the field within the picture. Some pictures were taken in which it was supposed to be raining hard. The principal artists were wetted, and a general rain effect was obtained by arranging a plank on trestles above the camera, upon which men stood and poured water from watering cans about 4 feet from the camera lens. Of course, in such a big picture as this, one must expect a few historical inaccuracies and anachronisms, and there were 1 or 2, such as the rifles being of the 1874 pattern and a corrugated iron roof entering into one picture. Wellington's hat was that of a French marshal.
After just 5 days, shooting was over in more ways than one, and it was time for Mac McDowell to find out if his gamble had paid off, or if he had made an expensive mistake. On the 8th of July, 1913, London's Palladium Theatre played host to a private showing of the Battle of Waterloo. Afterwards, the Times declared the picture to be a triumph of stage management, and an indication that the British film industry was
recovering with rapid strides much of the ground lost to foreign competitors in the early days of the new industry, when one is inclined to think its possibilities were not thoroughly grasped in England.
Commercially, the film was an unqualified success, with British display rights being bought at auction for the princely sum of £5,000 and similar sales being made abroad. On the 28th of June, 1913, it became the first feature film to be shown at the newly opened Alcazar Cinematograph Theatre in Edmonton, London. Such was the film's popularity that it spawned a parody, Pimple's Battle of Waterloo. In their review of the film, the Bioscope had this to say about the Battle of Waterloo.
Naturally, one's first sensation on hearing that the British and Colonial Kinematograph Company were preparing a film of the Battle of Waterloo was a feeling of gratification that at last a great chapter of our national history was to be immortalized in pictures by a native firm of producers. One of the outstanding features of a film dealing with the Battle of Waterloo is, naturally, the opportunity it offers for spectacular display. And of this opportunity, Mr. Charles Weston, the producer of the British and colonial film, has taken advantage. The whole picture, indeed, is a series of battle scenes, all of them magnificently carried out, with any number of men and horses. And where gunpowder is concerned, it is a regular Guy Fawkes Day.
Although the Battle of Waterloo was acclaimed by public and critics alike, the British War Office took a contrary view, as evidenced by an exchange of letters between H.W. Rands, landlord of the Oakley Arms in Rushden, and Leo Chiozza Money, MP for East Northamptonshire, as printed in the Bioscope.
The Oakley Arms, Rushden, June 13th, 1913. Chiozza Money, Esquire, MP, Sir. As one of your constituents, I venture to ask if you can give me a reply to the following questions. A. By whose authority did the squadron of Lancers from Weedon Barracks take part in the manufacture of a cinematograph picture at Irthlingborough on the 9th and 10th inst? B. Is it possible for any private individual or company to hire out portions of the British Army for pecuniary gain? C. If the amount paid was, say, £250, what became of it? Apologizing for troubling you, I am, sir, yours faithfully, H.W. Rands.
The Grey House, Hampstead Lane, Northamptonshire, August 30th, 1913. Dear Sir, I am sorry it has taken me so long to give you a definite reply to your query of last June, but the delay has not been through my fault. I now enclose you a letter I received from the Secretary of State for War, which I should be obliged if you would return to me when you have read it. I am obliged to you for having written to me on the subject, and I will see the same sort of thing is not likely to happen again.
War Office, Whitehall, SW, August 8th, 1913. Dear Chiozza Money, I have inquired into the matter of the assistance stated to have been given by a squadron of Lancers in the manufacture of a cinematograph film at Irthlingborough, Northamptonshire, and find that a squadron of 12th Lancers did in fact give assistance in the manner stated. I am informed that a sum of money was received by the regiment in consideration of the services rendered, and part of the sum so received was paid to the men who took part, the remainder being kept in hand as prize money for the men in competitions for skill at arms, boxing, swimming, etc. Although the display was not a public one, I do not regard the use of troops for such purposes as desirable, and those concerned have been so informed. Yours faithfully, John Bernard Seeley.
After the Battle of Waterloo, Charles Weston went on to film 6 more films in and around Irthlingborough, which might have become Britain's answer to Hollywood but for the intervention of the First World War. In 1917, he returned to the USA, where he was unable to find work. A back injury led to an addiction to painkillers, which in turn led to his suicide. Weston ended his life by leaping from the 18th floor of New York's Aeolian building. He left behind a suicide note and an envelope containing a hypodermic syringe and needle. On the envelope he had written, "This is man's greatest curse." The Battle of Waterloo was thought to be one of the great lost films until a member of the Irthlingborough Historical Society saw a tiny fragment of it at an Italian film festival in 2002. Upon learning that the fragment had been acquired from the British Film Institute, the member contacted the Institute and discovered that it possessed a total of 22 minutes of the 90-minute film. Since then, other bits of the film have been recovered, and now approximately half the original film has been brought back to life.
The Battle of Irthlingborough was written and produced by Patrick Whitaker.